talented carpenter lost absolutely everything in a work accident that almost cost his life. The hands that were his livelihood, the wife who couldn't bear to see him suffer, the house he built with his own hands, and his confidence in himself. Considered disabled by doctors and abandoned by those he loved, he spent 2 years on the streets, drinking to forget physical and emotional pain. This is the real story of how a man who touched wood like an artist learned to rebuild his life from scratch, without the hands that defined him, and became more prosperous and fulfilled than he ever imagined possible. Leave in the comments, would you have the strength to start over if you lost what most defines who you are? Chapter 1. Michael Chen had been working with wood for 24 years, but his hands were more than tools. They were instruments of artistry that could transform rough lumber into furniture so beautiful that clients would weep when they saw the finished pieces. At 42 years old, he was widely regarded as one of the finest custom furniture makers in the region, with a waiting list that extended 18 months into the future. Living in a beautiful Craftsman-style house that he had built with his own hands, Michael shared his life with his wife Jennifer, whom he had married 18 years ago, and their 2 children, 15-year-old David and 13-year-old Sophie. The house itself was a showcase of Michael's artistry, with custom cabinets, built-in furniture, and architectural details that demonstrated the highest levels of woodworking craftsmanship. Michael's workshop was his sanctuary, a 2,000-square-foot space filled with precision tools, exotic woods from around the world, and partially completed projects that represented months of meticulous work. Each piece he created was unique, designed specifically for clients who appreciated the difference between mass-produced furniture and the work of a master craftsman. The business had grown organically over 2 decades, built on Michael's reputation for creating heirloom-quality furniture that would be treasured for generations. His pieces commanded premium prices because clients understood they were purchasing not just furniture, but works of art that reflected both technical mastery and creative vision. Recently, Michael had been exploring ways to expand his expertise beyond traditional furniture making. He had been studying advanced business development through TED's Woodworking, a comprehensive system that helped skilled woodworkers develop specialized techniques and business strategies that could command even higher rates while serving clients who valued exceptional craftsmanship. The detailed guides had fascinated Michael because they showed how master craftsmen could build sustainable businesses that combined artistic vision with solid business principles, potentially providing even greater financial security while allowing for more creative freedom in choosing projects. But Michael was also deeply content with the life he had built. His hands were his identity, his tools were extensions of his soul, and his ability to create beauty from raw materials was the foundation of everything he valued about himself and his place in the world. The morning of October 3rd started like thousands of others. Michael arrived at his workshop at 6 a.m., reviewed his current projects, and began work on a dining room table that he had been crafting for a client who had commissioned it for her daughter's wedding. The table was made from a single piece of walnut that Michael had been aging for 3 years, and every detail reflected his commitment to creating something that would become a family heirloom. Michael was using his table saw to make a precision cut on one of the table's support legs when the accident happened. A knot in the wood caused the piece to bind against the blade, creating a kickback that jerked the wood violently toward Michael's hands. In the split second that followed, Michael's reflexive attempt to control the wood brought both hands into direct contact with the spinning saw blade. The injuries were catastrophic. Michael's right hand was nearly severed at the wrist, while his left hand suffered massive trauma to all fingers and the palm. By the time the paramedics arrived, Michael had lost so much blood that he was barely conscious, and both hands were destroyed beyond anything the emergency responders had ever seen in a workshop accident. The surgery to save Michael's life took 14 hours and required the skills of multiple specialists. Dr. Sarah Martinez, the hand surgeon who led the team, later described Michael's injuries as among the most severe she had encountered in 20 years of reconstructive surgery. We managed to reattach Mr. Chen's right hand, but the nerve and tendon damage is extensive, Dr. Martinez explained to Jennifer during the first of many difficult conversations about Michael's prognosis. His left hand required the amputation of 3 fingers, and the remaining fingers have very limited function. I need you to understand that even with the best possible outcome from months of rehabilitation, Michael will never regain more than perhaps 20% of his previous hand function. The words hit Jennifer like a physical blow. She understood immediately that the man who had defined himself through his ability to create beauty with his hands would wake up to discover that his identity, his livelihood, and his artistic gifts had been destroyed in a few seconds of contact with a saw blade. When Michael regained consciousness 3 days after the accident, his first instinct was to look at his hands. What he saw were bandaged stumps and twisted fingers that bore no resemblance to the strong, skilled hands that had been his most prized possessions. The right hand that had been reattached looked foreign and felt completely numb. The left hand was missing the 3 middle fingers, leaving only a thumb and pinky that moved awkwardly and painfully. "The doctors say I might regain some limited use," Michael said to Jennifer during one of their first conversations after he woke up, his voice hollow with the understanding of what he had lost. "But I'll never be able to do fine work again. I'll never be able to create anything beautiful." Jennifer tried to be supportive, but Michael could see the fear and uncertainty in her eyes. Their entire life had been built around his ability to create custom furniture that commanded premium prices. Without that income and without his identity as a craftsman, who would he be? What kind of future could they have together? The months of rehabilitation that followed were a nightmare of failed attempts to regain function in hands that would never again be capable of the precision work that had defined Michael's entire adult life. Physical therapy sessions that should have been encouraging became daily reminders of everything he had lost. Michael watched his fingers struggle to hold a pencil, fumble with buttons on his shirt, and shake uncontrollably when he attempted tasks that had once been as natural as breathing. The man who had been able to carve intricate details into hardwood could barely sign his own name. But perhaps even more devastating than the physical limitations was the psychological impact of losing the identity that had given meaning to his entire existence. Michael had never been just a carpenter. He had been an artist whose medium was wood, a creator whose hands could transform vision into reality. Without his ability to work with wood, Michael felt like a musician who had lost his hearing, a painter who had gone blind, or a writer who could no longer hold a pen. The essence of who he was had been severed along with the nerves and tendons in his hands. The financial pressures began almost immediately. Michael's custom furniture business required his personal involvement in every project, and without the ability to do the detailed work that clients paid premium prices for, the business simply ceased to exist. Orders were canceled, deposits were returned, and the waiting list that had once been a source of pride became a painful reminder of opportunities that would never be fulfilled. Within 6 months of the accident, Michael and Jennifer were facing bankruptcy. The house he had built with his own hands would have to be sold to pay medical bills and maintain some semblance of financial stability, while Michael figured out how to rebuild a life around limitations he had never imagined having to face. But the deepest loss wasn't financial. It was the growing realization that the man Jennifer had married, the father David and Sophie had known, and the craftsman who had found such joy in creating beautiful objects, had been permanently changed by an accident that had taken away everything that defined his sense of self and purpose in the world. Chapter 2. The deterioration of Michael's marriage began slowly, but it accelerated as the reality of his limitations became undeniable. Jennifer had fallen in love with a confident, creative man whose hands could build anything, and whose artistic vision brought beauty into the world. The person Michael had become after the accident was a shadow of that man, frustrated, angry, and consumed by grief for the life and identity he had lost. Jennifer tried to be supportive, but she was also struggling with her own grief and fear. The financial security they had enjoyed was gone. The future they had planned was impossible, and the man she had married seemed to have disappeared, replaced by someone who was bitter and increasingly dependent on alcohol to manage the physical pain and emotional devastation that defined his daily existence. "Michael, you're still the same person," Jennifer would say during their increasingly frequent arguments. "You're more than just your hands. You're intelligent, creative, and capable of doing other things." But Michael couldn't hear her encouragement over the sound of his own despair. "I'm a carpenter, Jennifer. That's who I am. That's all I've ever been. Without my hands, I'm nothing." The children were also struggling to understand the transformation of their father, from a confident provider and creator, into someone who spent most of his time sitting in his workshop, staring at tools he could no longer use and projects he would never complete. David, now 16, had learned woodworking skills from his father and had planned to join the family business after college. The accident had not only destroyed Michael's career, but had also eliminated the legacy that was supposed to pass from father to son. "Dad, maybe you could teach other people," David suggested during one of their conversations. "You still know more about woodworking than anyone else. Maybe you don't have to use your hands to share what you know." But Michael was too consumed by his own loss to see possibilities that might exist beyond the limitations of his physical disabilities. The suggestion that he could teach others only emphasized what he could no longer do himself. The financial pressures intensified as medical bills accumulated and their savings were depleted. The house that Michael had built as a showcase of his craftsmanship became a daily reminder of everything he had lost, and the mortgage payments became impossible to maintain without the income from his custom furniture business. Jennifer found work as a full-time administrative assistant, but her salary wasn't sufficient to maintain the lifestyle they had enjoyed when Michael's furniture commanded premium prices from wealthy clients. The family was forced to sell the house and move to a small apartment that felt like a prison compared to the beautiful home Michael had created with his own hands. The loss of the house was the final blow to Michael's sense of identity and self-worth. He had built that house board by board, had crafted every detail with care and pride, and had seen it as a permanent testament to his skills as a craftsman. Watching strangers walk through the rooms he had created and evaluating his life's work as just another piece of real estate was more painful than any physical therapy session. Michael's drinking, which had started as a way to manage physical pain, escalated into alcoholism as he tried to numb the emotional agony of losing everything that had given his life meaning. He would spend entire days drunk, unable to face the reality of his limitations or to imagine any future that didn't revolve around the hands he had lost. The breaking point came 18 months after the accident, when Jennifer found Michael in their apartment bathroom at 3 a.m., drunk and holding a razor blade, seriously contemplating ending the pain permanently. "I can't live like this," Michael said through tears of rage and despair. "I can't be this person. I don't know who I am if I can't create beautiful things." Jennifer realized that the man she had married was dying a little more each day, and that her attempts to hold their family together were only enabling his self-destruction. With David preparing for college and Sophie needing stability that Michael couldn't provide, Jennifer made the most difficult decision of her life. "Michael, I love you, but I can't watch you kill yourself, and I can't let the children watch it either. You need professional help, and until you get it, I think we need to be apart." The divorce papers were filed 6 weeks later. Jennifer moved with the children to her sister's house in another state, leaving Michael alone with his disability, his alcoholism, and his conviction that the accident had not just destroyed his hands, but had ended any possibility of happiness or purpose in his life. Without the family that had given structure to his days, Michael's descent accelerated. He lost the apartment when he could no longer afford rent, and he found himself living on the streets, sleeping in shelters when beds were available, and on benches or in doorways when they weren't. The man who had once created furniture for wealthy clients was now begging for spare change outside hardware stores, hoping to earn enough money for cheap wine that would help him forget, at least temporarily, the magnitude of everything he had lost. Michael's appearance deteriorated as quickly as his circumstances. The strong, confident craftsman who had taken pride in his appearance became a disheveled homeless man whose clothes were dirty and whose damaged hands marked him as someone to be avoided rather than respected. But perhaps the cruelest irony was that Michael's homelessness brought him into contact with the construction industry he had once been part of. He would see carpenters going to work each morning, their tool belts around their waists and their hands strong and capable, and the sight would trigger episodes of grief and rage that would send him deeper into the bottle. For nearly 2 years, Michael lived on the streets, convinced that the accident had not just taken his hands but had destroyed any possibility of rebuilding a meaningful life. He had become invisible to most people, just another homeless person whose story no one wanted to know and whose future seemed hopeless. But Michael's story was far from over. His hands had been destroyed, his family had been lost, and his identity had been shattered. But the qualities that had made him a master craftsman, patience, attention to detail, problem-solving ability, and the capacity for sustained effort toward long-term goals, were still intact, waiting to be redirected toward purposes he had never imagined. The transformation that would remake Michael's life and identity was about to begin, triggered by an encounter that would challenge everything he believed about what was possible for a man whose hands could no longer create the beauty he had once brought into the world. What do you think about Michael's downward spiral after losing his identity as a craftsman? Have you ever experienced a loss so profound that it changed who you thought you were? Leave your thoughts in the comments about how you would cope with losing the very thing that defines your sense of self and purpose. Chapter 3. The encounter that would change Michael's life happened on a cold December morning outside the downtown library, where Michael had been sleeping in the doorway to escape from rain that had been falling for 3 days. He was approached by an elderly man named Frank Morrison, who walked with a cane and moved with the careful precision of someone who had learned to adapt to physical limitations. "Son, you look like hell," Frank said with the directness of someone who had lived long enough to speak truth without worrying about social niceties. "When's the last time you ate something that wasn't liquid?" Michael looked up at the stranger, annoyed at being disturbed but also curious about someone who seemed genuinely interested, rather than just trying to move him along like most people who encountered homeless individuals. "What's it to you, old man?" Michael replied, but without the hostility he usually directed at people who tried to engage with him. Frank studied Michael's damaged hands with the eye of someone who understood both craftsmanship and disability. "Those are the hands of someone who used to make things. What happened to them?" The question was asked with such matter-of-fact compassion that Michael found himself answering honestly for the first time in months. "Table saw accident. 2 years ago. Destroyed everything I was good at." "What did you make?" "Custom furniture. I used to be a master craftsman." Frank nodded slowly. "I can see that in how you hold yourself, even now. The body remembers skills that the hands can't perform anymore." There was something in Frank's manner that made Michael pay attention in ways he hadn't focused on anything in 2 years. This wasn't pity or casual curiosity, but genuine recognition of something that most people couldn't see. "I'm Frank Morrison. I used to be a concert pianist until arthritis destroyed my finger joints when I was 45 years old. Spent 5 years feeling sorry for myself and drinking away the pain before I figured out that losing my hands didn't have to mean losing my music." Michael stared at Frank, trying to understand what the old man was telling him. "How do you not lose your music when you can't play piano?" "By discovering that music isn't just in the hands, son. It's in the mind, the heart, and the knowledge that comes from years of understanding how beauty is created. I couldn't play anymore, but I could teach, arrange, compose, and help other musicians discover things about their craft that they never knew existed." Frank extended his hand toward Michael, palm up, showing fingers that were twisted and swollen from decades of arthritis. "These hands haven't played piano in 30 years, but they've helped create more beautiful music than I ever produced when I could still perform." The conversation continued for over an hour, with Frank challenging Michael's assumptions about identity, ability, and the relationship between physical skills and creative contribution. Frank had not just survived the loss of his ability to perform music. He had discovered ways to contribute to music that were more meaningful than anything he had achieved as a performing musician. "Michael, what you've lost is the ability to physically create furniture with your hands. But what you haven't lost is 24 years of knowledge about wood, design, craftsmanship, and problem-solving that very few people in the world possess. The question is whether you're going to waste that knowledge feeling sorry for yourself, or find ways to use it to create value in the world." Frank offered Michael something he hadn't received in 2 years. Not pity or charity, but a challenge to reconsider the relationship between his identity and his physical abilities. "There's a workshop space in the community center where I teach music theory. It's not being used in the afternoons. If you're willing to get cleaned up and sober up, I can get you access to that space. What you do with it is up to you." The offer represented the first real opportunity Michael had been given since the accident, but it also required him to do something he hadn't done in 2 years. Believe that he might be capable of creating value in ways that didn't depend on the precise function of his damaged hands. Michael's first weeks at the community center were difficult. He was physically weak from 2 years of poor nutrition and alcohol abuse, and he struggled with basic tasks that required fine motor control. But Frank was patient and persistent, providing both practical support and philosophical challenges that forced Michael to reconsider his assumptions about ability and contribution. "You keep trying to do things the way you used to do them," Frank observed during one of their sessions. "But you're not the same person you were before the accident." You need to discover what this new version of yourself is capable of creating. During this period, Michael began exploring adaptive techniques and technologies that could help him engage with woodworking in ways that didn't require the precise hand control he had lost. Voice-activated design software, adaptive tools, and collaborative approaches to creating furniture that combined his knowledge with other people's physical skills. The breakthrough came when Michael realized that his value wasn't in his ability to physically manipulate wood, but in his understanding of how wood could be transformed into beautiful, functional objects. He began developing detailed plans and instructions that other craftspeople could follow to create furniture that met his exacting standards for design and construction. The first piece created using Michael's adapted approach was a dining room table that he designed using computer software and detailed written instructions, with the actual construction performed by a young carpenter who had excellent technical skills but limited design experience. When the table was completed, both Michael and the young carpenter understood that they had created something neither could have achieved alone. Michael's design knowledge and aesthetic judgment had been combined with physical skills he no longer possessed, resulting in a piece of furniture that met the highest standards of craftsmanship. "This is what I've been trying to tell you," Frank said when he saw the completed table. "Your value isn't in your hands, it's in your mind, your experience, and your ability to envision beauty that other people can help you bring into the world." Michael began to understand that his identity didn't have to be limited by his physical disabilities, but could be expanded to include new forms of creation and contribution that he had never previously imagined. The realization that he could still create beautiful things, even if the process of creation had to be different from what he had known before, marked the beginning of Michael's transformation from victim of circumstances to innovator who was discovering new possibilities for meaningful work and creative expression. Call to action. Michael's journey of rediscovering his value beyond physical limitations was supported by the same kind of systematic thinking and business development principles that he had been studying before his accident. Resources like Ted's Woodworking provided comprehensive frameworks for understanding how skilled craftspeople could build sustainable careers around their knowledge and experience, regardless of physical limitations or changing circumstances. If you're facing challenges that seem to limit your potential, discover how Ted's Woodworking can help you develop new approaches to creating value and building success that doesn't depend on perfect conditions. Click here to learn how thousands of professionals have transformed obstacles into opportunities for growth and achievement. But Michael's personal transformation was just beginning. He had learned that he could still contribute to the creation of beautiful objects, but he hadn't yet discovered the full scope of what was possible when someone with his knowledge and experience decided to build a completely new approach to meaningful work and creative contribution. Thank you so much for staying with us this far in this incredible journey of rediscovery and adaptation. We truly appreciate your dedication as a viewer, and believe me, the best is yet to come. What follows will show us how Michael's acceptance of his new limitations became the foundation for achievements that exceeded anything he had accomplished during his years as a traditional craftsman. Chapter 4. Michael's success with the collaborative approach to furniture creation opened his mind to possibilities he had never considered during his years as a traditional craftsman. Working with other people to bring his designs to life wasn't just a way to compensate for his physical limitations. It was a way to create furniture that was more ambitious and sophisticated than anything he could have achieved working alone. Over the next several months, Michael developed a network of skilled craftspeople who specialized in different aspects of furniture construction. Carvers, who could execute intricate details. Upholsterers who understood fine fabrics. Finishers who could achieve surfaces that seemed to glow with inner light. By serving as the designer and project coordinator for these collaborative efforts, Michael discovered that he could create more beautiful and complex pieces than he had ever achieved working alone in his workshop. His role had evolved from craftsman to artist-director, orchestrating the skills of multiple specialists to achieve visions that exceeded what any individual craftsperson could accomplish. The business model that emerged from this approach was both innovative and profitable. Clients paid premium prices for custom furniture that represented the highest levels of craftsmanship, while the craftspeople who executed Michael's designs earned more per project than they could command working on their own. Michael's reputation began to recover and then exceed what he had achieved before his accident. Word spread throughout the region about a furniture designer who created pieces of unprecedented beauty and complexity, and Michael found himself with a waiting list that extended further into the future than he had ever experienced. But more importantly, Michael was discovering that his new approach to creating furniture was more intellectually and creatively satisfying than his previous work had been. Instead of being limited by what his own hands could accomplish, he was now limited only by his imagination and his ability to communicate his vision to the skilled craftspeople who brought his designs to life. The personal satisfaction of this work was profound, but Michael also realized that his experience of overcoming disability and rebuilding his career around adapted approaches could be valuable to other people facing similar challenges. Michael began volunteering at rehabilitation centers, working with people who had suffered injuries that affected their ability to work in their chosen professions. His message was simple but powerful. Physical limitations didn't have to mean the end of meaningful, productive careers if people were willing to adapt their approach and discover new ways to contribute value. "I'm not going to tell you that losing the use of your hands isn't a tragedy," Michael would tell groups of people struggling with similar injuries. "But I am going to tell you that your value as a person and as a professional isn't limited to what your hands can do. Your knowledge, experience, and creativity can be applied in ways you haven't imagined yet." Michael's volunteer work led to speaking opportunities at conferences for disability advocates, rehabilitation professionals, and business groups interested in adaptive employment strategies. His story of transformation from homeless alcoholic to successful entrepreneur resonated with audiences who needed to hear. The devastating setbacks didn't have to mean the end of productive, meaningful lives. The speaking engagements also provided Michael with additional income that supplemented his furniture design business, creating financial stability that exceeded what he had achieved before his accident. But perhaps most importantly, Michael's work with disabled individuals led him to develop systematic approaches to helping people adapt their skills and knowledge to new circumstances and opportunities. Drawing on the same methodical thinking that had made him a master craftsman, Michael created training programs that helped people with various disabilities discover how their existing knowledge and experience could be applied to new forms of work and creative expression. The programs combined practical skills training with psychological support and business development guidance, helping participants not just adapt to their limitations, but discover opportunities for growth and achievement that they might never have pursued if they hadn't been forced to reconsider their assumptions about ability and contribution. Michael's approach to disability adaptation drew on many of the same principles he had been studying before his accident, through professional development resources that emphasized systematic thinking and creative problem-solving. The TEDS Wood. Working materials he had been reviewing included comprehensive guidance for developing adaptive approaches to complex challenges, principles that proved just as valuable for overcoming physical limitations as for mastering advanced craftsmanship techniques. The success of Michael's training programs led to contracts with rehabilitation hospitals, disability advocacy organizations, and government agencies interested in helping disabled individuals transition to productive employment. Within 3 years of his encounter with Frank Morrison, Michael had built a multifaceted business that included custom furniture design, disability adaptation training, and motivational speaking. The combined income from these activities exceeded anything he had earned as a traditional furniture maker, while providing the kind of meaningful contribution to society that he had never experienced during his years working alone in his workshop. But Michael's personal transformation went beyond professional success. His work helping other people overcome disabilities and adapt to changed circumstances had given him a sense of purpose and contribution that was more profound than anything he had experienced during his years as a traditional craftsman. The man who had once defined himself entirely through his ability to manipulate wood with his hands had discovered an identity based on his ability to help other people discover possibilities they didn't know existed. Michael's relationship with his children also began to heal as David and Sophie witnessed their father's transformation from defeated victim to successful entrepreneur and disability advocate. David, now in college studying business, had watched his father's journey with amazement and pride. "Dad, what you've accomplished is more impressive than anything you did before the accident. You didn't just rebuild your life, you created something completely new and better." Sophie, now 16, had chosen to write her school's required senior project about her father's work with disabled individuals. My dad taught me that who we are isn't defined by what we can do with our bodies, but by how we respond to challenges and how we help other people overcome their own obstacles. The recognition that his children were proud of what he had accomplished after the accident meant more to Michael than any professional success or financial achievement. He had not just survived the loss of his physical abilities. He had used that loss as the foundation for creating a life of greater meaning and contribution than he had ever imagined possible. Chapter 5. 5 years after his encounter with Frank Morrison, Michael had built a life that far exceeded anything he had achieved before his accident. His furniture design business had grown into one of the most prestigious custom design firms in the region, creating pieces for clients who appreciated the unique aesthetic that emerged from Michael's collaborative approach to craftsmanship. The disability adaptation programs that Michael had developed had helped over 300 individuals transition from the despair of physical limitations to productive careers that utilized their knowledge and experience in new ways. His training programs had become models for rehabilitation professionals throughout the country, and his speaking engagements had inspired thousands of people to reconsider their assumptions about ability and contribution. But perhaps most meaningful to Michael was the personal transformation that had accompanied his professional success. The angry, bitter man who had spent 2 years homeless and alcoholic had been replaced by someone who found deep satisfaction in helping others discover possibilities they hadn't known existed. Michael's relationship with Jennifer had not been rebuilt. The damage from his years of self-destruction had been too severe for their marriage to recover. But their interactions were now cordial and focused on their shared commitment to supporting David and Sophie as they built their own adult lives. More surprisingly, Michael had found love again. Dr. Sarah Chen, a rehabilitation psychologist who worked with several of the programs Michael had developed, had become first a professional colleague and then a personal partner who understood both his limitations and his achievements. "What I admire most about Michael," Sarah would say when people asked about their relationship, "is not that he overcame his disability, but that he learned to use his experience of loss and adaptation to help other people discover strengths they didn't know they had." Sarah had also helped Michael understand that his value extended beyond his professional achievements to include the personal qualities that had enabled him to transform devastating loss into meaningful contribution. The patience, persistence, and attention to detail that had made him a master craftsman had also made him an effective teacher, mentor, and advocate for people facing their own challenges. The custom furniture business that Michael had rebuilt around his collaborative approach continued to thrive and evolve. His designs had become increasingly sophisticated as he learned to work with craftspeople who brought specialized skills and perspectives that enriched his creative vision. One of Michael's most celebrated recent projects was a complete furniture collection for a luxury hotel, involving over 40 pieces that showcased different aspects of his design philosophy and the collaborative approach that had emerged from his adaptation to physical limitations. The project required coordination with 12 different craftspeople, each contributing specialized skills to create furniture that met the hotel's exacting standards for both beauty and durability. The collection was featured in multiple design magazines and helped establish Michael's reputation as one of the most innovative furniture designers of his generation. The business principles that supported Michael's success drew heavily on the systematic approaches to professional development that he had been studying before his accident. The TED's woodworking resources he had explored provided frameworks for understanding how skilled professionals could build sustainable businesses around their expertise, regardless of changing circumstances or physical limitations. Michael's story had also become a case study used in business schools and rehabilitation programs to illustrate how apparent disasters could be transformed into opportunities for innovation and growth when approached with creativity, persistence, and willingness to adapt. The speaking engagements that had grown from Michael's volunteer work had evolved into a secondary career that provided both income and the opportunity to influence how society thought about disability, adaptation, and human potential. Michael's presentations to corporate audiences focused on the business value of adaptive thinking and the competitive advantages that could emerge from hiring and supporting employees who had learned to solve problems in unconventional ways. People who have overcome significant disabilities often develop problem-solving skills, persistence, and creative thinking that are extremely valuable in business environments, Michael would tell his corporate audiences. The same qualities that allow someone to adapt to physical limitations can help organizations adapt to changing market conditions and competitive challenges. The training programs that Michael had developed for disabled individuals had also expanded to serve other populations facing major life transitions. Military veterans adjusting to civilian careers, older workers whose industries had been disrupted by technology, and professionals recovering from illness or injury that affected their ability to work in traditional ways. The common thread in all of Michael's work was the message that individual identity and professional value weren't limited by physical abilities or current circumstances, but could be expanded and redirected toward new purposes that might prove more meaningful than what had been lost. Michael's children had both chosen career paths influenced by their father's example of transformation and service. David had decided to specialize in adaptive technologies that help disabled individuals access educational and employment opportunities, while Sophie was studying occupational therapy with the goal of helping people rebuild productive lives after injury or illness. Dad showed us that the most important thing about a person isn't what they can do with their bodies, but how they respond to challenges and how they help other people, Sophie said during her college graduation speech. He taught us that every limitation can become an opportunity if you're willing to think creatively and work persistently toward new goals. The memorial that Michael had created in his home workshop honored both his previous identity as a traditional craftsman and his current role as an adaptive designer and disability advocate. The space included examples of furniture he had created before his accident, alongside pieces designed through his collaborative approach, demonstrating both continuity and evolution in his creative development. Frank Morrison, the elderly pianist who had challenged Michael to reconsider his assumptions about ability and identity, had become a close friend and occasional collaborator. At 87, Frank continued to teach and compose, providing ongoing inspiration for Michael's understanding of how creative contribution could evolve and deepen throughout a lifetime. "Michael, what you've accomplished proves something I learned 50 years ago," Frank said during one of their regular conversations. "Physical abilities are just tools for expressing the creativity and knowledge that define who we really are. When the tools change, the creativity adapts and often becomes more sophisticated and powerful than it was before." Standing in his design studio each evening, surrounded by the plans and models for furniture that would be created through collaboration with skilled craftspeople, Michael often reflected on the journey that had taken him from master craftsman to adaptive designer and disability advocate. The man who had once believed that his identity was inseparable from the precise function of his hands had discovered that his true value lay in his ability to envision beauty, solve complex problems, and help other people discover possibilities they hadn't known existed. The accident that had seemed to end his meaningful life had actually been the beginning of a more profound and impactful career that served not just clients who wanted beautiful furniture, but people throughout society who needed to understand that physical limitations didn't have to mean the end of productive, creative, satisfying lives. The carpenter who had lost everything in a tragic accident had become the innovator who proved that human potential could expand rather than contract when faced with challenges that forced creative adaptation and new approaches to meaningful work and contribution. This story shows us that our identity is not in our physical abilities, but in our capacity for adaptation and overcoming. Michael proved that losing everything can be the beginning of finding who we really are. Sometimes we need to lose our old identity to discover our true strength. How would you define your identity beyond your current abilities? Tell us in the comments what makes you who you are. If this story touched you, subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell for more stories of rebuilding. And don't miss the next video with another inspiring journey of overcoming.